afternoon, everyone. Thank you. This is the largest panel that we have. Thank you, Gary, Fazal, and Hannah for being here. Of course, we've come here to discuss diversifying Asia's tourism future. And Fazal, I want to begin with you because I want to talk about, Nadia and I kind of touched upon it earlier in the conversation. But, Muslim travelers are one of the fastest growing segments in the region. And technology is playing a huge role in shaping their experiences. So how are expectations shifting, when it comes to real-time halal-friendly info or even culturally attuned services? And the most important question, is the industry keeping up?
Okay, let me try. Okay, thanks for having me today, Skift, Rafat. Thanks for inviting. I think, if you look at the biggest pain point when Muslims travel, the biggest pain point is food, right? So I think when Muslims are traveling, now that the technology is available, they are going to really use technology to see whether the destination has halal food. So what I keep telling destinations is that even if you have halal food and they're not discoverable online, it doesn't exist for the travelers. So I think, of course, Google is still better at doing that, but AI is just coming just behind now in terms of trying to help you with that. So finding, halal food, these are the two, finding prayer facility, these are the two biggest pain points. So you have to be able to help them with technology to find them before they come. Yes, if they have not done their research, when they come, you need to be able to help them as well. But 80%, 90% of the travelers today are doing that research before. They're not going to go to the destinations and keep looking, where is my halal restaurant? They've already done their research. So I think you really need, that's why I think a lot of destinations now, like even Macau and in US and New York City, we are developing Muslim travel guides for them so that it's helpful. But and as Nadia was saying in the morning, and they're also looking at hotels which are Muslim friendly as well. They're also looking to engage with the local Muslim community. So how do you use technology to help them in planning their trip to the destinations that shows all this can be discovered online? I think that's how most travelers are now planning their trips, and especially younger Muslim travelers. Especially Gen Zs who are either going alone, or Gen Z females are, all the research that we have done, Gen Z females are the biggest influencers in terms of trip planning when it comes to family trips. They are the ones who are making all the research and all that. So I think you need to be able to engage with them online using technology to make it your destination or service discoverable.
So clearly there's a lot of work that is yet to be done by the industry as far as, being more accessible to the Muslim traveler is concerned. But Hannah, since you also dabble in that space, I want to ask you about the fact that behind all this, digital layer, what makes a destination truly, authentic and welcoming and not just performative for Muslim travelers?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think it's so interesting when you look at destinations like Europe, right? And I've had conversations, and I'm sure you, Fazal, have also had conversations with some European destinations. And when we talk about Muslim-friendly travel, here in Southeast Asia, we tend to use the words Muslim-friendly. And a lot of destinations in Europe don't really like that, because they're like, if we call ourselves Muslim-friendly, does that mean that we are not friendly to other religions, right? We can't call ourselves that, we can't do that. And it's more about, like you say, being welcoming, giving the information. Like Fazal, you were saying that. It's about educating the local stakeholders. These are some of the things that are important. These are some of the nice to haves. These are the non-negotiables. But then really putting that information out there for the traveler to then make their own informed decision. I'm comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable with that.
Gary, Hannah spoke about authenticity and experiences. I want to come to you with a question on, how are destinations repositioning themselves, destinations in Asia repositioning themselves to kind of cater to the evolving expectations of travelers? And what role do things like film tourism and these gaming tie-ins that we hear of, and cultural services, what role do they play in this?
That's a really interesting point, Peter, because I think we hear this word authenticity, we hear these phrase cultural immersion all the time, but different destinations have their own ways of promoting their own USPs. And if you look at a destination like Macau, for example, which is really interesting, most of the tourism there is man-made. You look at Singapore's future, the investment in infrastructure, in experiences, they won't be culturally immersive. Singapore, for example, is partnering with a very famous company called PopMart from China, which is about IPs and collectible toys.
Lububus.
Yeah, Lububus, right? So it's going to have the world's first PopMart experience center. Now, that's not really cultural authenticity related to Singapore. It's an attraction. It's something that is going to promote tourism. So there's this dichotomy, really, of cultural immersion and man-made tourism. And you referenced there film tourism, which I think is particularly interesting. The case study we've heard a lot about today is a certain American show. But if you look at a city like Shanghai, for example, now Shanghai doesn't really want for tourists. It has 350 million visitors a year, 350 million visitors a year. But there was a very famous show, I think it was the end of 2023, 2024, produced, it was the first TV show by the Hong Kong director Wong Kar-lai. Okay. And he produced a show called Blossoms Shanghai. And this show was reframing Shanghai back to the 1990s. And what it did is it sparked this interest in nostalgia tourism in Shanghai, all these different locations around the city for 1990s Shanghai, and it reframed tourism for younger people. And the social media elements of that were just huge. So you can see that tourism across the region is going to have different touch points, different interest points, whether it's man-made, whether it's nostalgic, whether it's the future, whether it's AI. It's such a diverse region. I think Laura earlier said, this word dichotomy of trends, and that really, really encapsulates what's happening in this region.
I'm sure, because I don't know how many of you have watched When Life Gives You Tangerines, and how many have wanted to go to Jeju after watching that. I think that Korean show is doing really well. But beyond all that, Gary, I also want to talk to you about infrastructure, right? We have infrastructure coming up, like Cambodia's the sleek new techno airport, and then of course Vietnam has its bullet train plans as well. So how are these destinations using infrastructure to kind of shift perceptions as well as improve access as well?
So two different case studies there, both very important. The new Techo airport, which opens in Cambodia, Phnom Penh, I think in July, designed by Foster and Partners, who have designed airports around the region, including Beijing Terminal 3. It's a beautiful airport. It's one of the most beautifully designed airports. So I think that's designed, obviously Cambodia needs more air connectivity. It has this beautiful new facility that should attract probably more flights from India, perhaps more flights from China. So that's one way of doing it. When you look at the high-speed railway in Vietnam, that's an entirely different composition, really. Mm-hmm. It's a north-south highway, so from Hanoi in the north to Ho Chi Minh in the south. Mm-hmm. It's about 1,200 kilometers. It's the most ambitious high-speed railway in Southeast Asia, and it's really borrowing a lot of the concept from China. China has the largest high-speed railway network in the world, and that's had two impacts. One, it's made just general purpose travel much more easy, much more frequent. You can travel across the country for purpose to visit your families, domestic travelers, but it's also reignited tourism. A lot of young people are using the train now in different ways. Destinations are marketing themselves in different ways because they are accessible by high-speed rail. And that's what you will see in Thailand. It will actually reinvigorate the whole tourism ecosystem of Vietnam. And I think it's very exciting. It won't happen for another decade or so. Yeah. But once the financing is in place, I think Vietnam will move ahead very, very fast with this. And I think the knock-on effect is every other country in Southeast Asia will want to follow suit.
Hannah, Gary spoke about strategic positioning and, of course, about infrastructure. But we've also seen that, reliance on a few key markets like China can really shake things up, right? So what are destinations doing to kind of diversify, both in terms of the tourists that they, the source markets that the tourists come from, and the kind of tourists that they want?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, I think that they have been doing all sorts. I mean, of course, right, before the pandemic, China, massive, massive market, particularly for Southeast Asia. And we all learned, okay, you can't put all of your eggs in one basket. You could still kind of argue that we still haven't learned that. And countries like Thailand at the moment are kind of suffering because this, 2024, Chinese arrivals were about 30% of their total arrivals. This year now, year to date, is about 15%. So they've dropped, so they're kind of learning. They've then started to look at India, like we were hearing this morning as well. So they've done visa-free access for India and getting those in. But the numbers are still obviously a lot smaller than China, but they're looking at that. We've also seen Central Asia becoming interesting. Just last week or the week before, Vietjet have announced this new initiative with Kazakhstan. So now they're going to have Vietjet Kazakhstan, which is a whole new play. They're talking about that being a bridge between Southeast Asia and Central Asia. You've got the links with the Middle East. AirAsia have just announced this big strategic expansion into Saudi Arabia as well. So you're seeing the airlines looking for these different markets, the destinations also looking for these different markets, but it's always a lag, right, between deciding you're going to start to do this and when you actually see those results. And in terms of what kind of travelers, I mean, this comes down to, yes, we've heard about high value.
Yes.
You could argue, is that really happening? I'm not convinced in a lot of markets in Southeast Asia. But certainly niching down, right? I think people are recognizing, or destinations are recognizing the value in going after the concerts, the events, the sports tourism, the fans in terms of that, but also things like bird watching or adventure. I can put my Adventure Travel Trade Association hat on and say we're seeing a lot more interest in adventure in APAC from destinations wanting a piece of that and realizing that those kind of travelers tend to be more sustainably minded, they tend to have a lighter footprint as well. So there's a lot of things in this mix, I think, to try and diversify. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that we're still at the beginning of that journey here in Southeast Asia.
Fazal, I want to come, this is a question for all three of you, but I want to come to you first. Are we seeing some real policy change post-COVID, or has it been mostly reactive?
Yeah, I think some definitely policy driven. One example is Hong Kong, actually. I mean, it's related to your question on diversifying arrivals, especially in that part of the world, Hong Kong, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, were depending on, 1-2 geographies for a bulk of their travelers. And I think post-COVID, at least, I know for sure, Hong Kong really made a top-down strategy on we need to diversify, and from the government itself, and this was early last year. And I haven't seen such an amazing transformation in 17 years of Crescent Rating existence. I mean, they have just within 16 months turned around the whole of Hong Kong to be Muslim friendly. Just a few days ago, the head of the Hong Kong government made a video talking about his mission to make Hong Kong Muslim friendly. It's a public video. So it's really a top-down strategic move to make Hong Kong, diversify Hong Kong arrivals. That's really the basis of it. Just to give an example, last year when we started working with them, sometime in May there were only 2 hotels which had some level of halal or Muslim-friendly services. Today, they have 60 hotels, even brand-name hotels, who are providing some form of Muslim-friendly travel facilities, including halal food. The halal restaurants have gone from like 80 to 160. It's a really a huge transformation.
Mm-hmm. Gary and Hannah, I also want you to answer this question about, has there been some real policy change, and how much of what we have learned during the crisis is sticking?
Honestly, it's very unfashionable to talk about the pandemic. 5 years later, but it still has a psychological impact.
Exactly.
It still has a legislative impact, and we're still really seeing how that will play out. I think, coming back to your point about China, I mean, whichever way you look at China, China is sui generis. It is exceptional. It is totally unique. And I think one of the impacts that we're going to see longer term related to China is China's opening up to inbound travel, which we didn't really see before. It started to open in 2023 with this visa-free tourism. Now, the one thing about the Chinese market always has been primarily and understandably about domestic travel. And domestic travel has changed and reignited and revitalized in many, many ways since the pandemic. But most destinations in Southeast Asia didn't really take any notice. They only looked at inbound travel from that country. But now you will start to see more people from Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore traveling to Singapore. They're going to experience these domestic travel trends that you see in China. And they're going to come back wild, and they're going to start saying, well, we want some of that here. So I think there is going to be this sort of transition into the region simply by the fact that more Southeast Asians are going to be traveling to China. And I think that's something we have to watch over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, like, you can only ignore China at your own risk, right?
Right.
Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of thinking around sustainability and what kind of policies that the governments have been doing for that. And obviously, there has been a lot of talk about how important sustainability is, a lot of destinations going out and saying we want to be greener and more sustainable and everything else, but not putting the tools into place, right, to support that. Singapore is an exception. I think Singapore is always the exception in Southeast Asia, just virtue of being smaller, it has more money, it's easily controlled, right? So they've put in a whole roadmap. They're incentivizing hotels to get certification, everything else. I think a lot of other regions, a lot of other countries within Southeast Asia are kind of relying on the private sector to also drive this forward.
Fazal, of course, you just now cited Hong Kong's example, and when we are talking on policy, you've also talked about how different destinations are approaching Muslim-friendly tourism. So whether it's Vietnam, Thailand, Hong Kong, and of course even Switzerland, right? So can you talk about some, of course you spoke about Hong Kong already, but can you talk about some of the standout examples and why do they stand out?
I think, clearly Taiwan has been targeting this market for a long time, pre-pandemic actually. And once again, Taiwan has a Muslim population of like 0.1% maybe, With that, because if you want to develop a halal ecosystem, it's good to have a domestic consumers, but Taiwan is an exception actually. Without a domestic market, they have been able to drive, they have gone from like, and I'm talking about 6-7 years ago, going from like 10 halal restaurants to now, I was there a couple of months ago, they have 200 plus halal restaurants certified by the local authority. I think Taiwan is really aggressively targeting this market and done a good job. What has been surprise to us is Macau, of all the places, I mean, that's so we've been doing some work, and they just released the Muslim visitor guide for Macau that we produced for them in 5 languages. So Macau wanting to reposition to also attract them.
What are the 5 languages?
English, Arabic, Mandarin, Bahasa Melayu, and Bahasa Indonesia.
Okay.
So that's a huge thing actually, for them to really go at it. And I think Philippines is another good example. The Philippines has been also doing a lot of work to target. So in general, Southeast Asia has really embraced the market because, I mean, of course, Macau and Hong Kong are not Southeast Asia, but Asia has, I don't know, 40% of the population is Muslim anyway. So, and now that most of them, and we're going to release those data in 2-3 weeks' time in our report, there is a lot of short haul travel now. And in this region, we have a huge Muslim population. They are going to go into these destinations.
Again, a question that I want to ask all 3 of you. Are governments actually, that's taking off from what Hannah talked about, sustainability. Are governments taking the time to build inclusive ecosystems that benefit both travelers and the locals, or is it still mostly top-down branding?
That's a big question. I think we have to be realistic about this region and how two factors. One, the travel markets here are young and nascent. They're still developing. And economies are young and nascent and still growing. And so we are still on this developmental phase of building tourism out. And even though you hear in areas like Bali, Japan, Thailand to some degree, you hear about over-tourism, the push for numbers will continue. You can hear all this talk about high quality, high yield, high value, but the push for numbers is still there. You can see it's happening. So I don't think we're at that point yet.
Hannah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot more, at least newspaper headlines around conflicts, right, between the locals and the tourists. And then that raises that whole question about, well, how should a destination approach tourists? In theory, you know, they should be guests in that country, right? It should be about providing them with an experience that the destination, the destination itself needs, not that tourists need. It should be kind of flipped. But I think, and you know, to go back, Rafa was saying, you know, Asia has this amazing hospitality culture. I think that could be taken advantage of a little bit by the tourism industry. And you know, I think back a couple of years ago, I was moderating a panel in Cambodia about adventure travel. We were talking about infrastructure developments, and you know, and I said, "Is that a good thing?" And he was like, "No, it's terrible. Infrastructure. I can't have that. That's the death of my kind of adventure and my European tourists when they come to Cambodia. They want to be out in the wild and all of this." And you're like, well, a road could make the difference between life and death for some of these rural communities. It's looking at it from a very privileged, entitled way, and I think we still need to kind of flip the script on that here in the region.
Fazal, what is your take on it?
No, I think, I mean, I'm looking from a Muslim travel point of view. I think one of the challenges is how destinations are organized. They are still organized by geographies. You know, you have somebody in charge of China, somebody in charge of India. I mean, they have KPIs to get people from. So you don't really have a cross-geography segments being looked at, you know, with real purpose. So that's the challenge. I mean, when we pitch Muslim travel, you know, do you pitch to the guy in charge of China or guy in charge of, you know, Southeast Asia? So I think that's the challenge that we face. So I think, so to break that, you really need like a Hong Kong, you know, top-down approach. Then the destination puts in a lot of resources to drive that. I think unless destinations start seeing segments across geographies, you know, which has similar requirements, I think it's a challenge. Yeah.
I think, Pedin, it comes back to your point about Techo Airport in Cambodia. You know, new airport in Ho Chi Minh City. Singapore is expanding Changi Terminal 5. Hong Kong has a big expansionary airport program going on. These are expansionary. These are about growing tourism. There's your answer.
Gary, on the topic of growing tourism, you touched upon it just earlier. We see that countries in the region are in a bit of a number race right now, right? They have these very ambitious tourism goals. So is this surge like creating a pressure among destinations to grow fast? Or are you seeing destinations trying to grow smart? What is that, what is that balance that you strike between ambition and sustainability?
It's a really good question, particularly at this point in time. So for the last 2-3 years, since this region reopened after 2-3 years of closure, the race has been on to get back to 2019 levels. That's across the region, that's competitive. You know, we talked about the competitiveness between destinations in previous sessions. That's still going to go on. Once you reach that parity with 2029, well, what's the next level of growth? I think what you're seeing is some countries, Vietnam at the moment is a good example, is sort of moving ahead in its growth rate. Perhaps to the detriment of Thailand. So what happens? You know, will Thailand want to catch up again with Vietnam? It's hard to say. And then you've got countries that will probably remain around a sustainable level. Singapore probably won't grow its numbers that much because it's a high-cost destination. So you have all these different elements coming in. I still don't think we have seen the potential from the Indian market or the regrowth of the Chinese market yet, and that's going to bring a lot more tourists into the region. So it's all to play for, but growth is definitely going to be the key priority.
You know, we just have like 2 minutes left. So whether it's about, halal ecosystems or infrastructure or just about experiences, Asia's reset is more than just about recovery, right? So if each one of you very quickly will pick one big, unlock for the region, what would it be? Hannah, let's go with you.
Okay, intra-ASEAN travel. That's, I mean, for Southeast Asia, that is still the key to the big driver, right? 1 in 3 travelers in ASEAN are from ASEAN. Yet when you look at flight capacity versus 2019, actually it's not quite back there yet. It's still a little bit behind where it was in 2019. I think there needs to be much more connectivity between secondary cities within Southeast Asia. And I think with all of the protectionism, people slightly more reluctant to travel longer haul. That's where the gold mine is going to be.
So inter-ASEAN travel is your answer. Fazal, what about you?
I wanted to say intra-ASEAN, but now that she has told. So I think just some numbers, you know.
That's the advantage of going first.
Yeah, just some numbers. You know, we have been tracking the market for a long time, 47 seconds. So in 2010, Muslim arrivals accounted for about 5%, 6% global arrivals. This year, we're going to release some numbers in the next 3 weeks. It's about 10 to 11%. And our projections for 2030 that Muslim arrivals will be about 13 to 14%. So they are not a niche market anymore. So I think destinations should take them seriously.
Gary, what about you?
I would like to see more focus on domestic tourism. I think we have to rebalance, and I think the pendulum has swung too far away into international and inbound tourism. And I think we should probably look at countries like China and India that do domestic tourism very, very well, and look at some of the lessons to be learned there.
And do you think that are countries happy with domestic tourism? Don't they want foreign tourists?
It fluctuates. It depends how inbound tourism is doing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gary, Hannah, and Fazal, for this. I really had a great time, and I learned a lot from the 3 of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you.